React hooks were introduced back in February 2019 and have changed how most of us have been writing components ever since. But the first question we have to ask ourselves before we jump down that rabbit hole is, why hooks? I mean, we were doing okay before we had React hooks, and React has no intention of killing off class components anytime soon. So, is it even worth learning? I'm hoping after this video, I'll have convinced you it definitely is. And if you liked the video, make sure you subscribe, because this is the first video in a series on React hooks where you'll learn a lot more. So let's jump in. Okay, welcome back. So why are hooks a great addition to React? Well, the first thing is, they let you add state to your functional components. Since hooks don't work inside classes, this is kind of an obvious side effect of adding hooks. When we use hooks, we will have to write our components as functions. Before, people might have written their pure components in functions and then had to refactor them as soon as they needed state. At least now, we can just add in state as soon as it's needed without extra boilerplate or refactoring needed. This means we can have a consistent way to manage state in our components. The second reason is you can share state and logic between components a lot easier. We'll see this in greater detail in a future video, but hooks have made it so easy to share state and functionality between components. Using things like context hooks is amazing for sharing state around an application. Then, things like custom hooks have made it really easy to share logic. The next reason is a little to do with sharing the logic, but as a lazy developer, this is my favorite thing about hooks, and that's you write less code. Why? When you remove lifecycle methods, this bindings, constructors, and a render statement, you end up with a lot less lines of code. And when you can share more logic, you again end up writing less code. We will see a sample of this a little later in the video with some code I refactored using hooks. The next point is helped by writing less code too, and that is your code becomes more declarative. Hooks provide a declarative API in the component for state and side effects. This is one of the main benefits as it makes your code easier to read and understand. If you're working on a project by yourself, you might not think this is a big deal, but most of the time, and for most people, you won't be working alone. And another thing that helps when you are reading other people's code or creating and maintaining other people's code is it removes a lot of complexity from the code. So what do I mean by complexity? Well, if we can embrace hooks, we can reduce the number of concepts you need to understand when writing React applications. No more lifecycle methods. With hooks, we have a single function use effect which absorbs most of the complexity, so you will only need to learn this one concept well. Hooks let you always use functions instead of having to constantly switch between functions, classes, higher order components, and render props. Having a single pattern for most of your code base will make things a lot simpler for you and all of your colleagues. Let's look at a little code so we can actually see the difference. This is a little application I built in which we fetch a Pokemon icon from the Pokemon API by its Pokédex number. I'll add the code sandbox in the description so you can play around with it until the next video. But basically, I grab a random number between 1 and 151 because I only care about the original Pokemon, and I pass them down to a Pokemon fetching component which grabs a Pokemon by its Pokédex number. So let's have a look at the class component first. This is an unbloated class component with no constructor to make things somewhat fair when comparing to a functional component. So as you can see within the class component, we have some initial state with an image URL that is empty and two lifecycle methods. One for when it mounts so that we do the initial fetch, and then one for any time we update the Pokemon number, and that's going to update anytime we click here. So let's have a look at a couple of Pokemon here so you can see it's all working. We're going to change this out for a functional component in a second. Okay, nothing too crazy going on in there. Okay, so let's get the functional one working. Okay, so we're back. And it still works, so let's jump in. So now if we look at the functional component, we have one function handling the lifecycle methods, no this keyword, and less lines of code. I think it's much easier to understand even for someone who is brand new to React or even newer to the JavaScript ecosystem. We can see things are pretty declarative. We have the image URL and a set image URL, which we are using around the application. We're not going to dive into this, but we'll definitely cover it in great detail in the next video. And you'll be a master of using these by the end of it. So that kind of covers our introduction to React hooks. So we know why we want them now, at least. And over the next few videos, we are going to cover use state, use effect, use reducer, use context, and creating custom hooks. With these hooks, you'll cover about 95% of your use cases. So make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell to be reminded when the next video arrives next week. If there's anything you'd like to see me build with React hooks to record as a tutorial, please leave it in the comments below. And until next time, happy coding.